Alrighty, tidy. So, I'm going to be discussing for a minute about Richard Spencer and discussing sort of him as the figurehead of the alt-right. I'm going to try to give a objective standpoint on my perspective about him. I'm not trying to take the piss out of him, as the British would say. I'm not trying to promote him in any way, really. I'm just trying to get at a fundamental flaw, I think, in his argument. Not saying that his arguments are not fair, but something that I think the other side would probably will probably try to bring up, and what I think can be done to remedy this situation to an extent. It's kind of an open question, though. I don't know the perfect response. But Richard Spencer has a very big fixation within his discussion about innovation, right? That whites have innovated the planet, that they've done a lot to create and build and structure the world, really. And but the problem with that is that this is a removal from whites' inherent piece of themselves. This is a removal from whiteness. Every new invention removes oneself from one's primal state. When we were originally evolving in a primal state in the wild, the vast majority of our evolution into whites happened in Europe. But the problem is whites are now in Australia and America. And so what the other side tries to do is then just say, oh, well, all white countries will just be multicultural because you've, violated our terms of service for having an ethno-state, and therefore you don't deserve one. So I think the alt-right as a movement really has to be sectioned off to some degree in terms of ideologies. And I'm not saying that it has to be, I'm not saying that to try to hurt it or anything, but that they can all come together. But that, Europe has people who live in Ireland who are Irish and descendant from Irish. They have a fundamental blood tie to their history. But that is removed slowly through more and more technology, through smartphones, iPads. As we become more and more of a speedier country, we see less and less of ourselves. We have less and less time. Everything has to be done in a jiffy, and it makes everything less meaningful, less tied to the land. So I think that there needs to be a more of a tie-in to each stage of history of white development. And America would be a shorter tie-in, right? Would be a tie-in to our settlers, a tie-in to sort of this period of, I guess it was probably, pre-Renaissance, Middle Ages, late Middle Ages, when Europeans first began to colonize the New World, and how mestizos and blacks do not have a tie into America. They do not have a tie directly into the settlement of America, not based on sort of some vague notion that Europeans innovate more. Do they innovate more? Of course they innovate more. But it does not mean that, just because a group innovates more does not mean they have more of a deserving nature. The idea is that we have a tie-in as a group to this land, a fundamental tie-in as white Europeans, as people who settled here from Europe, over someone like, an African who comes here tomorrow, or a mestizo who sneaks across the border. So, or someone who immigrates here, really, from anywhere else in the world. So that I think would be something that I think the alt-right should really champion, is that we have a communal psyche now. We, as Europeans, we are built really in a very somewhat similar landscape. We evolved in a similar landscape, from primal to classical antiquity to the Middle Ages and to the present day. We must be reconnected to every stage of our history in order for us to rebuild white psyche and white identity as a whole. We can't just say, oh, well, Europeans innovate more, so what we mean is innovation. No, that gets us right back to the stage that we are now, which is that people are able to then manipulate that and say, oh, look at all these inventions that blacks have innovated. Have blacks innovated? Of course they have. Of course they have. You can't discount that they haven't. Have Europeans innovated more? Of course they have. That everyone knows that. Okay, it's even the biggest liberal pushing that bullshit knows that. Okay, so let's not be. Even a black person knows that. Okay, deep down, that. So we don't need to sit and get into that bullshit debate. But what we need to do is define ourselves as people who evolved, people who have a deep and rich history and a connection to this land, to this territory. And if we sacrifice some of it to a foreign nation, a foreign genealogy that is not tied to it, that, especially in Europe, we are sacrificing a piece of ourselves. Not that we can't have immigrants, not immigrants, but not that we can't have some degree of an interaction with foreign nations, but we must have homogeneous societies. And I think this is a big problem because people will then just sit and try to discount European innovations, and we get to nowhere. So that's really all I have to say about that right now. And talk to you guys later. And another thing I wanted to say actually is, if whites are not tied into our history, we lose sight of ourselves completely. We lose what we are. We become sort of the generic left, essentially, with time, because every new innovation just seems like, oh my gosh, this is like a totally different space, and we stop thinking internally and feeling and stuff like that, and being white and promoting white. We become neurotics, essentially, city life neurotics. That's why so many people so far to the left live in the cities, is because they're completely removed from themselves, and they see a new iPhone as, now that's our identity. I don't know, it replaces the identity, every single new innovation, constantly moving forward as an innovation. Well, we keep moving forward and innovating, but we can't lose sight of ourselves. That is what has happened. That is the fundamental problem with white identity today. And no amount of sitting and talking about how great our innovations are, which they are great, will do to stop it. So we need to take a step back from like YouTube and all the great things that in the internet and all the things that whites have pioneered, and try to kind of go back, think in a terms of how we can remain connected to each stage of our history, how we can remain connected to a non-techno dominated society, and how we can become more more within ourselves, essentially. Jung talks a lot about this. This is where I kind of what gave me the idea, which is he talked about during his day, each piece of technology was continuously removing people from themselves. It was turning whites into neurotics. And he went to like African tribes or Native American tribes, and they told him about this and how they just seemed like completely confused, constantly like working towards some tranquil, beautiful future, some amazing, as we just constantly move through this dark, horrible period for some awful horizon, like the future is now. We must seize the moment. We must be ourselves. We must feel connected to our history, our food, our people, our culture, our religion, every single aspect of it. And I think that neo-paganism and the revival of Germanic paganism has started to do this, and maybe we can see that with all other things. People engaging in white culture, engaging in white history, and doing it in a way that is not angry at another group or anything, but just doing it for the sake of, in each country, in a local level, for the sake of improving our self-awareness. So anyways, I hope that helped to add to it. Thanks a lot. Appreciate the subscriptions. I know I'm pretty small right now. But thanks guys. Take care.